So this is a slightly unusual meeting of our Just Transition Network to think about, to kind of reflect a little bit on what's been happening so far, but then also to think about, okay, where do we want to go to next with all this? So we will record it just so because we've had a couple of apologies, and so they can watch that back, and because we try to record these anyway, and so people can catch up anyway, which actually I'll speak to in a little bit. So I thought I'd just start with a kind of recap of where we are. We circulated a bit of an agenda, but it's a little loose, and so I'm going to try and keep to that mostly through this meeting. But if I sort of start with a bit of a recap of where we are with the Just Transition Network and the thinking so far. So, I mean, it's been going for a while now. It's been going for just over 2 years. We've had lots of meetings and lots of activities off the back of that. 2 years ago feels like a long time ago, and trying to cast mind back to why it came into being, and in the way it is, I think is a useful exercise. So I think it was originally conceived from the TEC, from the regional TEC, Yorkshire and Humber TEC at the time, now of course North East Yorkshire and Humber. It was conceived as a group that supported or that provided provision in some way for green and environmental reps, or whatever they're called in your particular union, to make connections outside of their workplace, to upskill and learn about climate action and green organising in a kind of broader sense, and also just to be exposed to each other's and external campaigns and work, to sort of feel that there was a kind of community there of lots of people pushing in similar directions. And it's obviously spawned quite a lot of work over that period of time, partly for me, but partly for members as well. It's made a lot of connections which have supported green reps and Just Transition activists more broadly in the movement. And it also provided home for separate discussions and separate initiatives, most impactfully maybe the Leveraging Green series, which is this series of green organising workshops that we did across 2024 to the beginning of this year, 25, which had as its core the membership or the invite list from the Just Transition Network. As I said, we have recorded most of the meetings, not all of them, but most of them, and that's created a sort of bank of resources for green reps and others to use and refer back to. It's partly helpful for us to remember as members, but hopefully it's being used in that way. It's accessible wider than the network, so that green reps have that kind of sense that this is going on, even if they're not directly involved. That was something that I felt particularly important, or I felt to be particularly important, and so I wanted to do, because I was very conscious when I was a green rep in a workplace, I felt very alone. I felt like it was just me, and there wasn't a clear way of knowing what other green reps were doing or what people were doing in similar circumstances outside of my workplace. And that corpus of resources just didn't really exist at that time. And so I was keen to record that and kind of keep it going, and to provide that for people who were me in the past. But all of this, so I think that was the kind of focus, but I think all of this has meant that it's had an essentially quite narrow focus on supporting only a particular kind of trade union climate activist and climate action in particular. So I don't think it was set up rather to particularly support roles and work of non-workplace activists who are very numerous in this Just Transition base, or really set up, though we have kind of touched on it, but it wasn't really set up to recognize the intersectionality of climate action and health and safety, and of jobs campaigns, standard jobs campaigns, and of international justice campaigns and campaigns to change government policy and local policy and things like this. This setup also locked the network into a sort of top-down structure where the regional TUC, where largely me, I dictated what the meetings were on, what topics they were on, what the agenda contained, who spoke, when they spoke. And And it meant that we sort of defaulted to that thing that unions always do, where we set up a committee to solve a problem. And I think this kind of, in a way, became that, default to that union staple of circulating a fixed agenda and writing up formal minutes. We have actually stopped writing up formal minutes, or we had stopped writing up formal minutes, although there will be some for this one, because it will make decisions. But still, that kind of structure was there, and it probably didn't really need to be there. And I think it's also important when reflecting back that our region has been and continues to be a kind of climate champion. We're ahead of the curve in so many ways, and we have been for years, for decades. We've spawned amazing initiatives and campaigns and organizing techniques and community bodies and policy frameworks, and the Just Transition Network, as constituted, acknowledged that, but it didn't really take any of those into account, didn't really kind of carry the legacy of Yorkshire especially, but also North East Yorkshire and Humber as a kind of as a climate actor in and of itself, with a history there. So, I mean, obviously I've been doing a bit of thinking about this, but they were my kind of thoughts. So I think, and having discussed this with members here, I think there's a kind of general agreement, or something close to that, that there's an advantage to revising how the network functions and how it's structured, to make it into a body that better reflects the diversity of climate action in the region, that better connects climate action and trade union movements together, kind of climate action that originates from trade unions, but also climate action that originates outside, but in a kind of tangential way with trade unions. It would be good if they were connected better together. And importantly, if that wasn't directed so much from the TUC. I mean, the TUC is great, of course it is, but we lose something by not being able to kind of be a bit more organic with how ideas and initiatives and campaigns are developing. So there's what I'm proposing, and what this kind of meeting is to discuss in a bit more detail, is that we remake the network as something new, as a sort of network of networks model. So with involvement from yes, trade unions, but also all allied and aligned campaigns and groups in the region, and with activity directed by members, not by the TUC. With us still supporting, so we can provide administrative support and promotion support and hosting, and obviously we have lots of connections, political connections within climate movement and trade union movement, and wider as well, but we don't want to be overbearing. And I think also it would be useful if we had a sort of goal, not of just supporting green reps to kind of go through their journey, which was the core thing beforehand, but of joining up all, or a large segment of, worker and community-led climate action and just transition work across that whole patch. So it's a slightly different focus. And I think I'd also want to kind of underline the importance of creating a home in this new version where every Just Transition campaign feels welcome, and which every campaign can find useful, so that campaigns can be part of this and not feel like this is dictating a particular path, but which they have ownership of, or that they can come to us and say, you need to be doing X, and the group can mobilize around that if it wants to. And so I think there are a lot of groups here that could be beneficial, could benefit the network, or could benefit out of the network, could use us and we could use them in a kind of hopefully mutually beneficial way. So I had a think, and I've got a list. I think there's some key unions here to invite. Loads of unions are doing great work on this, but in our region, we've got Unison, Unite, GMB, PCS, BFAW, the bakers, NEU, UCU, NASWT, NAHT, FBU, Community, Prospect, CWU, USDOR, the several small finance unions. I think that's maybe all of the key ones, but I mean, that's already quite a long list. But then we've also got the trades councils, we've also got the county associations, and then we have countless climate or just transition groups, which the segment of which are already trade union aligned. They share personnel directly. Others are kind of aligned spiritually or politically, essentially unaligned, other than that they're just transition themed, and you know, obviously we are, and so we should be working closer with them. So I'm thinking people like Heat Strike and Better Buses and Retrofit for the Future and Stop Burning Trees Coalition and Just Transition Wakefield, with banners held high, Durham Miners Association, Worker Climate Project, Catchment Stewardship Project, GMB's Just Transition Panel, the Eco Educators Network, Safe Landing, South Yorkshire Climate Alliance, the Demilitarised South Yorkshire Network, Unite Climate Caucus, GMB for a Green New Deal, Friends of the Earth, loads of branches of them, the various carbon divestment pension board campaigns, the several branches of the Just Transition Coalition across our patch, Net Zero Yorkshire, York Climate Commission, Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission, Leeds Climate Commission, Climate Action Leeds, Net Zero Sailboat, so on and so on and so on. There's loads of these, right? And they have, to one or to a greater or lesser extent, trade union involvement and alignment. But we all are pushing in what looks like a very similar idea. If you listed our policies and priorities, most of that would line up. So I think, you know, the TEC really wants to convene a forum for effective grassroots just transition action. And I think this network can be more of that. And I think it can be more of that by bringing in these other campaigns in this slightly new direction, where we can sort of provide a direct linkage between green reps and shop stewards and trade union officers with the climate movement. So with all individual climate campaigners and the initiatives in the sector. And I think that would, and you know, and that would be a two-way street, go back and forth. And I think that would provide a platform for all involved to promote their own work, to all learn from each other's work and therefore mobilize that work, and to all share personnel. And you know, I mean, a lot of us already are in multiple groups, but this is a way of making sure that we're all aware of everything. And so it's about sharing intel, but it's also maybe updates and intelligence as well, personnel intelligence and updates as well, and for us to all kind of coordinate that work. And I think now is a particular point, which is kind of where all this started, because the trade union movement has recently declared a year of trade union climate action across 2024 and 2025. The bounds of that's changed union to union, of course, but the kind of this period is kind of this year of trade union climate action. And I think part of that being a focus, it enables us to double down on it and to sort of stoke up and catalyze trade union climate action and trade union support for the adjacent campaigns across our region, across the country more broadly. And so it's quite a timely change as well. So, I mean, there was a bit heavy in me talking lots, which unfortunately is what these have often become, right? And so I'm keen to get away from that. So I think that's the kind of vision that I think would be a useful thing to do. And I think it would be useful to also, therefore, to support that, choose now or elect now or appoint now, depending on how many candidates we go for it, something like a network coordinator or a chair, someone to sort of lead this or to hold it, and to be the kind of primary liaison with TEC, who's kind of supporting from an administrative point of view behind the scenes, to lead that group. And then potentially a number of geographically or thematically specific organizers, or maybe just general organizers underneath that, which would be something like officers to support the chair, share work, hold particular relationships or campaign coordination or whatever. So I think for the rest of the meeting, it's useful to discuss that vision and think about where we go with it, and then also to eventually settle down on picking some people to lead it into the next phase of what we do. And just to pause there as a breath before we open that conversation, thanks for everyone who's joined during my long ramble. Good to see you all. Okay, so I'm going to open that out at this point for thoughts on that proposal and thoughts on that proposal. I assume that all means all good ideas and no comments. Hi, Simon. We'll go to you.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, folks. For those who don't know me, I'm Simon Bones. I'm the regional campaign organizer in Yorkshire for Friends of the Earth. I probably fit into one of those categories that Sam's mentioned. When you talk about when you talked about the kind of continuing support for the group, Sam, from regional TUC, can you kind of clearly kind of define what that looks like, and particularly in relation to the network coordinator chair role? Um, and I think second question on that is actually looking as a as an organisation that's been tangentially involved in this network, but from outside the trade union movement, actually wondering whether, with that revised focus, whether there's a kind of potential role for having co-chairs. So one from within the trade union movement and one from outside, or maybe even more, to actually so we can strike that balance between union and non-union type work.
Thanks, Simon. There, yeah, so I mean, from the continuing support side of things, yes, the TUC doesn't want to drop this. We're happy to badge it as a TUC thing if that's helpful, if that's what we want to do. We're happy to host it with our services. We can cover administrative stuff like the mailing list and contacting people and set up meetings and all of that kind of stuff. And if there's anything helpful for us to do in terms of contacts or convening or like building use, if you want to kind of get together in person, that kind of thing, or if you've got any recommendations that we take to a wider to like an officer level thing within trade unions or particular politicians or whatever, we can obviously continue to be that. So very much still wants to be, within the TC, and we're happy to support that as much as possible. Just don't want to dictate how it goes. Yeah, please do feel free to continue to use the TC as much as possible, but take ownership. I mean, it's a bit of a risky thing, right? But we'll give ownership over to not TUC officers. On the second point, I think, yeah, I mean, there's potentially a place for co-chairs in this space. Other things work in a similar way, and there could be a strong advantage to that as sort of non-trade union and a kind of climate aligned and a trade union leadership working jointly might be really useful. I mean, that's in the spirit of the whole proposal, so happy to have that discussion. Then we'll go to Fran.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. A simple question, really. I think the principle is really good, and I like the idea of reaching out to lots of different groups. I'm involved with Better Buses, both nationally and regionally in South Yorkshire. I just wanted to ask, the TUC is now, as I understand it in the region, both the Northern and Yorkshire and Humber together. So would this body then see itself as encompassing the northern region of the TUC as well? That is Newcastle and places beyond, as I know, which makes it a little bit unwieldy. I mean, I'm already the massive list that you came out with of organisations in addition to unions. We're talking about potentially a very, very large body. And I just wonder how we can stop that becoming a talking shop, really, where people talk about what they're doing in their own area and in their own area of interest, but doing things that actually reach out beyond those people to the more general population. Are we going to be able to do that? Thinking about regional conferences or events like that might attract a broader audience than that already very big audience for the forum. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. Thanks, Fran. And you're right. I mean, it's it's quite a large area that we cover now, for everything from the border with Scotland all the way down to the Humber. I mean, that's half the country in terms of like actual mileage. It's yeah. So I mean, it is at the moment the North East Yorkshire and Humber Just Transition Network. So I think it probably wouldn't change from that. If the group did feel that that was too unwieldy, it could be split. Some of what we do is split regionally in the TC already. We kind of divide divide that line. So we've got the Northeast as one unit and Yorkshire and Humber as a separate unit. So that, yeah, I mean, could definitely do that at the moment. It's worth saying, I mean, that list, I I processed it down a little bit, but there are just a lot of organizations in this space, and they won't all engage with this, but it would be nice to open up the possibility of them, engaging here. And so there is a danger it will become unwieldy. I mean, the executive here, the officers will choose what they want to do with that. You don't necessarily have to get everyone in the same room at once, because maybe that's very long meetings. But also, it's a good thing to have as many people engaged as possible. So there's different structures on how you do this, and maybe that kind of detail is for later on. But yeah, you're right. We should be alive to the fact of we don't want to make it too unwieldy. But at the moment, I'm not sure that's an immediate danger. We'll go to Catherine.
Yeah, my concern is to make sure that the links with the trade unions are kept really strong, because that is part of the strength of the network. So I'm really pleased to hear that the network will be serviced, administratively, and the network and convened on the Teams, or whatever link, online fora, and advertised through the TUC, because I think that's really important. But it's trying to make sure that the actual trade unions, that are our route into communications with employers, is kept really, really strong, and the conversation and how we're going to be linked to the executive of the Northeast Yorkshire and Humber as well. So that's my sort of question mark there, because one of the reasons there's going to be a network and then a board separately, but we actually amalgamated the two, was we need the links into the Northeast Yorkshire and Humber executive, don't we? That's the sort of to make sure that happens as well. Thank you.
Yeah, you're entirely right, Catherine. I mean, it is a obviously the TC is convening this, and so it does need to be mostly, or have a strong trade union focus. We obviously are also a incredibly important player in any conversation that we should be in a lot more spaces. We represent a quarter of working people. We represent millions of people across the country, and so our kind of standing position is that no conversation is complete without trade unions being in that space as well. So yes, it would need to do that. And if there's, we're not going to drop this, it's very much within the TUC's kind of orbit, and so, or within or under our auspice. And so if there's any danger of that, there won't be a danger of it losing the trade union focus, because that just needs to be what we do. But I think at the same time, there's a huge benefit from trade unions being linked up with the wider campaigns in this space. This is something we hear all the time, and obviously the personnel thing is that often that is the case anyway. People, everyone in this room, in fact, I know everyone in this room wears more than one hat for what they do, and so yeah, it sort of formalizes that a little bit more. The executive link is really important. So yeah, we have the Northeast Yorkshire and Humber executive, which is the leadership of the Trades Union Congress across that region, to which individual unions send delegates to make sure that we're kind of aligning with everything. The formal place within the formal structure of this that would sit in terms of TUC is as what's called a self-organized group, which means it doesn't get a seat on the executive. But it would feed directly into it. So it wouldn't put personnel into the executive, but it would have a space to report back to the executive, which is, practically speaking, a very similar thing. We never take votes in the executive, so it doesn't really matter if you're sort of formally in it or not. So yeah, it would make sure that we're tied in. And it's important to remember, I mean, this is kind of the intricacies and what the TZ loves to do. I kind of made that comment about we set up a committee at any opportunity, but we also have a sort of similar thing called the Future Economy Subcommittee, which has a similar remit to the Just Transition Network, but exists for union officers, for relatively senior union officers. And so I'd like those things to talk to each other anyway, but it's just a different sort of different hierarchy and different kind of priorities in that space. Lucinda, I think you were, in fact, are you
She's
still there?
dropped out.
She's just dropped out. Okay, we'll go to Stuart then, and then, oh, unless, hold on. Lucinda, you're back. Can you hear us? Yeah. I think you were next if you're able to.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Trying to get back into swing of things. Yeah, I kind of think I get the idea of this and stuff, but I do agree with speakers before. I think we have to be very clear that we don't use the TUC front label and stuff. I think for me, it's a very different workplace that people are in now these days. I mean, you only have to look at the universities or, you know, other areas where we've got huge job losses and people are going through the cost of living crisis. There's a real push to the far right, and I've been at several meetings recently from the different equality groups within the university, really concerned about the effect that that is having, especially in education. So my real worry is kind of still not. I don't think we've quite got the mix where the connection between the campaign groups and the trade union movement are linked and strong enough. So there's a lot of really fantastic things going on. And I went to the Campaign Against Climate Change meeting last night, where we talked to people from India and I know some people on it, and Brazil and so forth, where you've got, I mean, India's got a huge trade union movement, something like 39.6 million, you know, it's like massive. And I just thought that sort of conversation was really, really important, because it's like when we talk about communities, we're talking about workers. You know, workers are part of the community and so forth. And so for me, I'd like to see this group, in whatever form it has, thinking about how the campaign groups can make the connections, can, you know, from the outside of the workplaces and vice versa. But I know that in my workplace, we have climate, obviously, because I do on the agenda in everything we do. However, it's very hard to get people. We've had green officers, and it's really, really hard for them in terms of the workload and stuff, or two lost their jobs. So to actually kind of continue and keep that at the forefront with the university executive board. So there's a lot of token tick boxing, but not enough of that sort of connection. And I know that from talking to Fran around better buses with Unite, there's a lot of difficulty in making those connections and getting sort of the actual bus drivers and people on board with it, and that's understandable. It's not, it's because I know that we've tried to do that for a long time, and I think with COP30 coming up, the work that I've been doing around it in terms of building for it, there is still that tension between sort of having the trade union movement as much at the forefront as all the different campaigns. And that's my dilemma with this, in terms of how we're going to make this so that, you know, the people that can attend, obviously, that's brilliant and stuff, but it's about the branches and the different workplaces that struggle to attend. I mean, I have attended as much as I can, but during the day, I have duties and things, and my union work is quite difficult to always attend, and therefore the your videos and things are fantastic, and I have used them quite a bit. But for me, it's more about not necessarily the setup, but how the setup is going to work to make sure that we have not just sort of one. And I don't mean dominate in terms of it's a wrong thing, but in terms of we have the sort of organising and the connections that work together on equal terms. I don't think I've made much sense, but I have been administering morphine to my mum and things, so I'm a bit like tempted to have it myself, but also just trying to manage all these meetings. So I apologise if it's not very coherent.
No, that's yeah, no, that was coherent. Lucinda, thanks. Thanks for your thoughts. And what you've highlighted is, yeah, I mean, is part of the thinking behind this, and is the constant challenge that I'm sure we have conversations about in every workplace, every kind of it sneaks into everything, and that it's just very difficult to organize around this because it's not a sort of immediate concern in workplaces. And it doesn't come with automatic facility time, and it doesn't come with it's all these kind of problems that we have. I think part of what we've kind of done in the TC historically with this network is that we have not necessarily addressed all of those things because these meetings have always been within TC work time, and I think that's part of what we've been doing, which means that it normally corresponds with when people are working, and so they can't necessarily take time. So the next stage of this may be thinking about evenings, it may be thinking about weekends or whatever, or a mix, or it may be thinking about how to how we encourage people to attend and make facilitation, make provision for that kind of thing to happen. So I think this slightly looser hold that the TC wants to hold on this actually partly answers some of those questions, or at least opens up space for us to be able to answer some of those questions. But I think it's about increasing impact and increasing personnel, increasing heads in the room on this, and I think that might be it kind of broadens the base of the kind of people who we're talking about or talking to and talking with. So it's less reliant on having to secure lunchtime slots and less reliant on trying to find a time that works with a relatively narrow group of people. It kind of expands that out with aligned people so that we'll maybe better able to attend. The other thing to say is that I think the TC capacity we've put to this at the moment, because it's been about leadership of the group and like deciding what it does, meant that we have not been able to prioritize the outreach element or the kind of supportive network kind of element or the kind of supporting mechanisms element of this. And so actually with TC loosening our grip on it a little bit, it will enable us to do more of that, which should hopefully grow the group and make it easier for workplace reps and others to participate more fully, or us to encourage them to do so. Stuart, you've got your hand up, and then we'll maybe move on.
Yeah, the conversation's moved on quite a bit actually, so I'm not sure if this is helpful or not. I was going to say that I think, irrespective of you talking about loosening the TUC, loosening its grip a little bit on this and broadening it out, I still think that the TUC badge, if you like, is really, really important in this, because the grassroots membership is sometimes, in some unions, in probably most unions, sometimes struggles to get that consistent, clear climate voice back into our own unions, particularly with pressures like the far right and reform and things that we are all struggling with in our communities as well. So I'm just going to put in a plea for making sure that is really somewhere front and centre and highly visible in this, that it doesn't get too diluted. Taking on board what Lucinda said about needing to bring more diverse voices into the network, absolutely, but not, there's a balance to be struck, and I think we need to protect that. We are here first and foremost as trade unionists, and taking on board what you're saying, what you say, this is actually the whole region, Northeast and Yorkshire and Humber. I wonder whether that's a co-chair or vice chairs, but maybe that's a way to think about subdividing the region to the Northeast and Yorkshire and Humber, and having either co-chairs or vice chairs from each region or something like that. Just a way of helping to manage that. Don't know if that's helpful, but anyway, thanks.
Yeah, no, that is helpful, Stuart, and I'm sure it's helpful for others in the room. I think I think I potentially slightly misspoke earlier in that I think I raised like a question about whether the TUC would badge it. But that's not really a question. So the TUC will badge this. It will be a kind of TUC body, but it won't be controlled by the TUC in that, you know, I won't dictate what it does. It will be dictated by the members. But that badge can sit alongside others, and I think that's the important thing, that, you know, it wants to be this kind of network of networks rather than a kind of delivery mechanism for a particular theory of what should happen in the climate space. I think it's useful for us to move on to the next bit. But Joe, you've got your hand up, so we'll come to you lastly.
Is that okay? Yeah, thanks everyone. It's a really difficult question to answer in terms of what the form and function might look like. I agree with all the points that have been made, both reaching out and retaining, you know, the really strong focus on building both capacity and awareness within the trade union movement. And I guess that becomes the sort of network ideas, in some senses, becomes an even bigger challenge, you know, since it doesn't refocus, it expands the challenge in a way. One of the, I suppose, as well as the sort of handing over the reins as such, and it being more organic in that respect, I think is just how best, and we're not suggesting we can do it in the next however minutes we've got on this call, but how best to get to a point where I think there's, I mean, maybe you've had them already, but for me, there's a kind of conversation with, for example, the official, you know, Sam, you mentioned the TUC's sort of officers network and the future economy panel, and having, you know, how do, apart from reporting to them, how at this stage, in terms of thinking about what we want to do, could we best have a conversation with them? Because, you know, understanding some of that might be useful. Not that would be necessarily this network is led by them, but these questions of what jobs will look like, how transition will happen, how do we ensure a fair deal for workers in the places that they live, you know, they're all presumably common themes there. But understanding a bit more about that remit and the kind of things that they're focused on will be helpful. I think the other thing, as you rightly say, is although a lot of the networks on climate do have individuals who are in unions or who are aware of some of the kind of class-based issues in relation to climate campaigns, I still think there's a huge amount of work to connect, as Lucinda was saying, you know, the reality of work, you know, workers' experience and some campaigns. And I'm not saying they're completely, you know, at odds, but there's loads that could be done there. And so part of the function of us in this network is to kind of, how do we take that message out to those campaigns and so on, as one example. And other smarter ways that we could be doing that. So I'm struggling a bit to answer or to kind of leap on to the yay, let's go forward, because I think there's still some big fundamental questions about what you know, what we can best do as a bunch of people as opposed to an idea.
Thanks,
Sorry,
Joe.
I don't mean to be obstructive, because I'm not trying to be obstructive of what we do next, but just trying to think, how do we do a bit more work to help us shape a decision about where we go next?
Yeah, no, I mean, what you're saying is correct and is a good challenge, and is part of my thinking to not, or our kind of collective thinking, to not want to dictate that up front, because otherwise we end up in the same position we were in, which we're trying to rectify. But to kind of create a space where exactly those kind of, I mean, that this isn't going to solve all our problems. This is going to be a mechanism, a structure whereby we can have more difficult conversations, and whereby we can bring in more heads into the space to be able to solve some of those problems. And so I think that's, yeah, they're really valid questions, and I'm going to note them down. But I think therefore the group rather than for us before the group is properly formed, you know, in this kind of new model to dictate. On the other bit, you asked about the TU, the trade union officers. So yeah, we have this future economy subcommittee, which is related to this and is senior reps within unions in North East Yorkshire and Humber who are thinking about, I mean, the clear future economy. So they're thinking about, like, in terms of jobs, so there's mostly energy jobs and jobs that are going through transition, and decarbonising jobs or kind of at-risk jobs, at risk of net zero, kind of managed badly kind of jobs, those kind of workplaces. So it's an aspect of this, but it's quite an industrial specific focus of this. I'd like, and historically the Just Transition Network has been a lot broader than that. You know, we've been able to talk about environmental and ecological issues, for instance, alongside the kind of slightly, you know, industrial issues. And we've been able to kind of think about just transition in a broader sense than only thinking about offshore and factories and things like this as well. So the two need to interact, and those those personnel, some of those are invited into this space, although I think we actually don't have many here, but they're invited into this space, and so that'll be a key part of that. But there's also a big advantage, and the network is especially well placed for this, to bring in grassroots and to bring in other climate activists or just transition activists that are broader, you know, who by their title or by their interests or by their affiliation are able to think broader than the sort of narrow, immediate, how to solve the immediate problems kind of thing. So, but I think that's true of lots of people in this call, right? And the broader list of people this went to, and that list I read out, that everyone is going to have their specific focus and their narrow interest, but it feeds into a broader whole. And so I think there's an advantage to bringing everyone in, and us to be able to work through that we are not all covering everything, but that we all add to the whole. And I think that's maybe a good segue, your question about like where this goes and what the structure is, to think about the next steps. And so to think about, okay, I suggested that we might want to create a chair or a network coordinator or potentially co-chairs or regionally specific chairs or organisers, kind of people to sort of specifically agree to be part of this and kind of help organise that. It doesn't need to only be those on the call today, obviously. This can go a lot broader. I had apologies from others who expressed kind of vague interest in this, in these roles rather than in the topic. And obviously it went to a lot more people than on the call generally. So this could be an ongoing conversation, and it kind of will be. But to ask the kind of question specifically, would anyone here like to take a sort of leadership role, or specifically leadership role, within this reformed Just Transition network, or is there anyone who thinks that someone else in this course should be doing that? I think it's one of these things where the first hand up is often will enable others to go up, but because of the, you know, there's a kind of, you don't necessarily want to take responsibility for something without having that support, but there's potentially more people willing to support than take direct responsibility. I did suggest, and we've sort of already kind of part thought about this, but we did consider whether Ellen wanted to take on a chair or a co-chair role within this space to get us started. Is that something that we can discuss here? Do you want to come off mute? Or can you not come off mute? Maybe you can't.
Yes.
There it is.
Well, I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be living in this region. Is the issue. Probably not very long. Now, I mean, I'm really very much hoping to maintain all the contacts in the region, but I'm probably going to be in the northwest before very long. So, and also there's a lot of other projects I think coming on that are, for instance, just yesterday I've been approached by somebody in Unite about trying to progress an official retrofit campaign in the union, and that in itself could be a big. There are a number of potentially quite high capacity needing projects coming along, which I think this network needs to be connected into, but are not necessarily regional things. And I mean, they don't need to be regional things, do they? We're all working on things that extend beyond the region. I think that I think it would be very rash for me to offer to take on work at this moment for this network, to be honest.
That's fine.
Sorry about
it's
that.
Just off the. That's fine. It's fine. It's just off the record what we were talking about the other day, but that's not a problem. Okay. Well, I mean, I would want to stress that I don't think, because the TCU is going to hold a lot of this, I don't think it would be particularly onerous to lead this or to kind of take one of those chair or officer roles. But that's fine. We can maybe decide this afterwards. What I'll do then, rather than us be sitting here waiting, is that we will circulate expression of interest afterwards to those here, but also those in the wider thing alongside the recording, and we can maybe people can volunteer through that mechanism. It's important that we end up with not just one or two people, but end up with a small group of people, so that we have a sort of a body that can share work and that can kind of bring in those multiple perspectives. And so if you were to get in contact, you'd be volunteering to be part of a shared, be part of a team, rather than kind of be everything on you. But that's absolutely fine. So we'll do that, and we'll circulate back, and we'll think about what to do. I think once we have that coordinator or those organisers in place, then there are a few conversations that need to happen. I think we need to think about, get those officers to kind of put their heads together and think about where they want to take this and what's useful. I think it's also useful to think about how often they meet and how often the broader group meets. It probably doesn't need to be as frequent as we have done because of that evolved structure. And it's whether we want to kind of put together a sort of, I guess whether we want to put together something like a launch meeting or a launch event, a kind of first thing, or whether we are happy to sort of take over the existing Just Transition Network kind of structure without too much of a fuss. These are all questions for once we have a sort of corpus of people interested, but we'll see how that progresses. So we'll circulate those interests, those expressions of interest requests, and we'll see where we get to from there. But thanks everyone for your time and for those thoughts about how we progress this. It's heartening to see that there is a kind of enthusiasm for something along these lines from the room. I think that's the kind of the vibe I got here, and the importance of a space that's something that would fill the space that I think we're all in agreement exists between trade union activists and climate activists, and sort of linking that stuff, those personnel and those campaigns and things together. But okay, well, we'll close it off there then, unless there's anything else for anyone else wants to say, and we'll be in touch shortly with next steps.